Thank you, Joanne, and take it away.
Thanks, Joe. Good afternoon, everybody. I see a couple names that I recognize. I see a School Academy teacher, so I am just really grateful that you all wanted to spend your Friday afternoon, at least for an hour or so, with us. I'm Joanne Schinstock, as Joe said, and I've got my email here, so hopefully you all can see that on the screen. Feel free to email me questions if the time ends and you still have questions or things come up down the road. I'm always happy to talk about writing and rhetoric with you. And then also, because I'm just curious in terms of who we have in the audience, if you're homeschooling or a classroom teacher, if you just want to put that, only because then it kind of helps me a little bit in terms of the feedback or kind of descriptions that I'll give. I see a lot of us are homeschoolers, which is wonderful. And if you're a classroom teacher or an administrator joining us, that's fabulous as well. I'd just like to get a sense of kind of who's in the group today. So let me go back to our screen. We're talking about the progymnasmata, right? This very fancy word. We typically just say progym. And if you are familiar with the series, you've probably already have gone through the introduction. So some of these terms might be a review. And then of course, if you're new, then I encourage you to not be intimidated by this word. We all refer to it as the progym. And I love this image because the progymnasmata refers to the preliminary exercises, the beginning, the foundation that we take from the Greeks and the Romans, and this idea here of the little boy on the shoulders of the man, much like teachers being the masters in the classroom or mom and dad being masters around the kitchen table, teaching their students. The apprentice-master relationship is really what's happening when we are teaching writing, right? Writing is a craft. So I really like that image because this is just kind of an aside, but many students will come to writing and they'll be very intimidated. Maybe they've had a bad experience. I'm sure we all have children in our home or maybe our classroom where we know they just approach writing with anxiety. And so I think this is a good thing for us as the teacher to have that in our mind when we're approaching writing with either our child in our home or in the classroom, that they get a sense that you're going to be walking alongside them through these various writing exercises and through reading these great stories. And so this is what you're going to hear a lot about today is the 5 reasons why we want to teach, or I hope you would want to teach the progymnasmata to your students. And so I'm going to lay out those 5 reasons in just a minute. But as I said, this is the ancient writing program. And as Christine Perrin wrote about in a blog post in 2016, she called it the step-by-step apprenticeship. And that's really what we're talking about here. So the Greeks and the Romans had this. They typically started with a 10-year-old in the grammar school, grammaticus. And so this was the plan, the program that was laid out for students to be trained to be great orators. So it's also important to keep in mind that this program is not just about writing, but it's about thinking well, speaking persuasively, writing persuasively. So it goes beyond the modern programs that just emphasize the 5-paragraph essay. So, and the progymnasmata has been really the program that has been used from ancient times all the way up, I would say, until kind of the last 100 years when education, last 150 years when education started changing. And now we have what I think most of us are familiar with. If you're like me, you were in school as a student in the 80s and 90s, and you might have returned to school after summer and you jump into your English class or your literature class and you're asked to write a story or an essay about what did you do for summer vacation, or what was your favorite trip that you took. And so you're kind of being asked to pull things out from thin air, right? This idea that you're just given kind of a prompt and a blank piece of paper and now go to it. And if you were like me as a student, I honestly felt like I wasn't a good writer. And that was my experience that I had. And later come to realize, well, it's not that I was a bad writer. It's that I wasn't given a structure. I wasn't given a model to imitate. And the type of school that I went to, it was not a classical school. And so my mind was not full of great stories that I could pull from. And so that's another piece that I'm going to talk about here. But we are reclaiming a system, a program, exercises that help students in the following ways. And so why do we want to teach the progym? Well, you can see here, it teaches the 4 modes of discourse. And I just want to say a little bit before we jump into that first point, I just want to say a little bit more about what's happening as we're guiding these students. So I talked about that well-stocked mind, right? So you'll see from the very beginning with our youngest students, I'll have questions from parents and they'll say, well, what do I do to prepare my student to study the progym? So they're thinking of their, even as young as kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and even for some of our third graders. And I always say, read great stories, read across the genres, read across the disciplines. If you have different magazines that come to the house and they're geared towards children and you really enjoy them, share those stories, read aloud to them, have them read to you. You're just filling their mind with stories that embody truth, goodness, and beauty. Talk about those stories, ask them questions. What was the story about? Why do you think the character did that? It's just through those conversations that you are priming the pump, so to speak, so that they will be ready to think more deeply about what they've been reading in their early years or what they've been listening to in their early years. Audiobooks are great. Not all students learn to read at the same time. And some students, even once they are able to read, they really enjoy being read to. So that's a little plug for keep on reading to older students or, using Audible, but you're preparing their mind by reading great stories and having discussions. That's really the best way, in addition to grammar study, to prepare a student for the progym. So in this program, as they start to learn these modes of discourse, they are encountering great stories, but they're also encountering models of great sentences and great paragraphs. And so we're never asking a student to create something out of nothing. And that's kind of why I remember my experience in school, first encountering writing. They just gave me a prompt and they said, okay, now write 3 paragraphs, write 4 paragraphs. But I didn't really understand how to say what I wanted to say well, or I didn't have examples to back up an opinion, or I didn't know how to explain something. So the Progymnasmata guides students step by step in order to prepare them for more formal study of rhetoric in their upper school years. But it's a progression of intentionally and slowly moving through these specific types of writing exercises where they're never asked just simply to write an expository essay one day, but from the very beginning, they have completed various types of exercises, imitation, discussion, and all of that shapes their ability to then put what they've been thinking or imitating as well into writing. So year 1, as I said, they're really going to encounter beautiful stories, fables, and other types of narratives. And they're learning how to write stories. And they're learning that the narrative is going to be a really important way to persuade, right? To persuade through telling great stories. And they're going to learn not just how to write the story, but what is the right story for this particular point that they're trying to persuade the reader of or the listener. So telling stories to persuade is really what's happening at this beginning stage. They're not learning those persuasive skills yet, but they are learning the art of storytelling. And then from year 1, jumping into year 2, the CREA is what is emphasized, and that is the expository essay, right? The narrative with the descriptive elements. So you can see, as I mentioned, the scaffolding, you build on each year, going from fables and narratives, then incorporating that into the expository essay. And then year 3 is really where I mean, that's my favorite year. That's the year that I teach. Books 5 and 6, they're learning the argumentative essay, the argumentative paragraph. So they're using narrative, descriptive, and expository elements to really learn how to argue a point, give it evidence, provide reasoning, and then understand that they have a voice, right? And they're using the models so that they're presenting a cohesive paragraph, a cohesive idea. They're never just flinging an opinion out there without any evidence, without any explanation. And one of my favorite exercises that we do in that year 3 is quarrel versus argument. So much of us in our modern times, we might hear the word argue, right? And we think, oh, that's a bad thing, like yelling across each other at the table, that's an argument. No. In the classical world, right, when we're talking about reviving the classical Christian understanding of virtue and excellence, we want to train our students to argue well, to write an argument well, to then present that argument well. It's the premise, it's the sound, valid argument with the evidence and the reasoning. What we don't want is the quarrel, where we're just kind of giving our opinions, and then it's just this emotional debate. It's this heated debate. And I don't need to, go into how that's playing out in our modern times. We as adults see that. We see people that are just getting into quarrels and not good, solid arguments or debates to arrive at truth and what is good and beautiful. So that's what we're teaching through this process, is not just the structure and the form, the content of what to write and how to write, but you can also see that we're bringing in that piece of virtue and excellence. And I'll talk more about that later as well. So the progym takes a scaffolding approach, a layered approach. The progym helps students refine and just deepen their understanding, while they're also beefing up their memory, right? Each year they're reading great stories. The Writing and Rhetoric series starts at ancient times and goes all the way through into modern times. So each year you're bringing in the ancient times, the medieval times, and then times from American Revolution, the Civil War. And so there are great stories and great biographies that come in. And this is a great way also to pair this with history study or literature study. So it's a very rich program that gives parents and teachers flexibility. And bringing this all back to kind of this idea of, we don't ask our students to write from nothing, right? That kind of empty head, but we ask them to think about something like, okay, Frederick Douglass in history, why is he praiseworthy? This is going to be this persuasive essay, or perhaps someone in history like Jesse James, right? Why is this someone who is blameworthy? So there's a purpose behind each work, and it's never just left up to the student to decide what are they going to write. There's time for that later. I think a good comparison is to say, okay, if you have a student who's learning piano, he's going to imitate Mozart, right? Until he or she can compose great work, great piano compositions. He or she isn't just going to all of a sudden be able to write their own works or compose their own music. They have to study and imitate those before them. And that's what we're doing through this program, which is, I think, why most definitely it's so refreshing for parents and teachers who feel like maybe each year we're starting a new program and I'm not really sure where we begin, right? So I would say this kind of cuts out having to jump from one writing program to the next. which creates a lot of confusion for students. So this is the progym is the solid way to teach students how, and again, not just to write well, but to be an organized thinker and to be a coherent speaker. All right, so we know writing is not automatic, and really they have to have this well-stocked mind. When we talk about the liberal arts, this term liberal is not what I think our minds go to in terms of politics, but it means the free mind. And in order to be a free mind, right, we have to, again, have the ability to think well, to reason well, and also to pull from what we've read, what we've studied in the past. We have this great memory. So they're reading great stories across the disciplines. And as I mentioned, once you're doing that, then students, as they grow through this program and they eventually get up to the upper years where they're working on a thesis, they're able to invent a topic, right? And of course, I'm referencing here the first canon of rhetoric, which is invention, this idea of finding something to say. And so what I love also about this program is that the pacing is appropriate for the student. You're not rushing them through. I mean, this happens over several years. We're talking about if you start them around, the earliest learner, if they're ready, is grade 3, all the way up into, of course, the end of middle school and high school. So when I talk about the thesis, right, we're talking about our older students who have had years going through this program. And then if you have some students who are jumping in, I know during Q&A, I'll probably get some of those questions. So I will talk about what to do with the student that didn't have perhaps the ability to start in grade 3 or 4, and now they're starting in middle school, or even they're coming to it as high schoolers. So not to worry, there's ways there that we also encourage students at any point to come into this program. So the progym helps students fill their minds with what is true and good and beautiful about humanity. And now in these later years when they're writing, they are able to, because they've got the content and they also have the structure and form, they're defining, they're comparing, they're determining relationships between ideas and people. So there's a great quote. I don't know, I'm going to kind of step away just a minute from the progym, but if any of you have this book, I'm sure many of you do. It's called The Mysteries of Life in Children's Literature by Mitchell Kalpachian. And he was he passed away in 2016, but he has this great quote, and he says, stories are for everyone who loves wisdom and truth in its purity and simplicity, and desires the wisdom of the ages and the proverbial truths that have been transmitted through the living stream of tradition, folklore, poems, fairy tales, myths, allegories, parables, and great adventure stories. So too, children's literature can reveal truths which escape the pundits and the professors. And I love this quote because remember the image I started in the beginning with the child on the shoulders of the man. It's so true with the teacher and the student, or the parent and the child at the table. We really do read these stories together. We discuss them together. I am always left changed and transformed by those discussions where I'm thinking about something a little bit more deeply, where I didn't anticipate necessarily having that experience when I think, okay, today I'm teaching writing to, my 8th grader or my 4th grader. And now we've just had this transformative conversation where we are just growing in our understanding of these eternal truths. So again, this idea of there's the academic formation, right? And then you have this character formation that's taking place just through the reading and the discussion of the stories. The stories, as I'm saying, evoke wonder and contemplation. There's activities for discussion, journaling, and then of course there's moments for silence, for art study, or picture study. So there's a lot of things here too that parents and teachers can do if they're needing to make modifications or some types of changes to incorporate learning differences that your children might have, or your students in the classroom might have. So there are a lot of ways to go through the pre-writing process, which is, I think, an important piece to this. It's a discussion-based pre-writing, fueled by journaling, art study. It isn't just the typical make an outline. There is that piece. We do teach formal outlining through the Progym, but you also have these other ways where you might be able to engage a student who, like I said, is intimidated by writing, who is nervous to join in conversation. So last year I did a webinar with one of our tutors, our special needs instructors, and that was one of the things that she mentioned, that this program is very flexible, and with the scaffolding built in, it's great for all learners. And then just with these stories, play and leisure comes into it. Sentence play, where you're doing exercises that you're imitating sentence structures. And with the older kids, you're imitating paragraph structure, or you're imitating the style of certain writers. Maybe it's Winston Churchill who we're imitating, or Frederick Douglass, or, oh gosh, there was a journalist we imitated one year, Nellie. I can't think of her last name. It's not coming to me, but they imitate her style. So our students are learning through that important exercise of imitation. And sometimes I have kids that say, well, is it copying? And I said, no, imitation, right? You sit down with the master and you imitate what they're doing until you grow in confidence and ability and skill and knowledge. And then you go and compose your own essays. So we're filling their mind with stories. They're imitating sentence structure, paragraph structure. They're learning what is an engaging, attractive way to persuade, right? To delight the reader, to, in some cases, to entertain, if that's the purpose of a particular essay. But the Progym allows the student to imitate and copy structure, style of writers, and the models are there to help them until they are creating their own original work. The next thing I want to talk about is this piece on speaking. You'll notice in this series that there are exercises, tell it back, speak it. This is where I also see a lot of my students come to life, because maybe they, again, are intimidated by writing, but they have opportunities to grow in confidence because they're asked to present their work. They're asked to participate in recitations, memory work. So all of these pieces go into creating a student, fostering a student who thinks well, writes well, and speaks well through that oral performance, read alouds. So it's emphasizing elocution. And it's more than just kind of a debate class, right? Because that's something different, and that's also important as well. But what we're doing here is talking about the presentation, right? What do we do with our body, our posture, eye contact, breathing, gestures? All of those things are a part of what forms a great orator. So again, it's not just about being the writer, it's about being kind of that full package, right? I mean, as people, we speak, we think, and we write. So we are seeking to cultivate all of those things through exercises like the recitation, the speeches, dramatic performances, and then of course sharing work. And that's also something that students enjoy a lot, is being able to read aloud their essays. So there's a lot in each lesson. I'm sure you've seen. You can't always do it, but again, Paul Kortepeter, who created this series, wrote it in such a way that there's a lot of flexibility. And then the final piece that I want to touch on is, well, I'll start with this quote from Peter Kreeft. I'm kind of paraphrasing it, but he says that prayer brings truth to the mind, goodness to our will, and beauty to our heart. So truth to the mind, goodness to our will, and beauty to our heart. And of course, these are the three attributes of God. And as Christians with a personal relationship with Christ, we know this, we see this, we encounter this. And so one of the things that I always explain to my parents is that, they ask the question, well, how do I know if my student is doing well in this class? How do I know if they've mastered the material? And if you've been in other webinars with me, I have said this before because I think it's really important. And Robin Berlew also gave this beautiful course on meaningful planning on Classical U. And this is where I got it from, but she talks about what should the student know, love, and do. And as I was going back through the introduction, and this is in all of our writing and rhetoric books, there's a quote in here, and as soon as I read it, I thought, yes, this is what I want my students to know, love, and do when they're studying the Progym and going through the series. So I tell my students, mastery looks like students loving truth and beauty, knowing the art of giving effectiveness to truth, and inspiring others to embrace truth, goodness, and beauty, and to engage articulately with the ideas of the day. And I'll read that just one more time. And again, it's just those three pieces: what I want my students to know, love, and do. And you can always flesh that out into more practical lesson objectives, because the practical is important, right? But we don't want to stop at the practical, right? Because when we're talking about classical Christian education and learning, that includes wisdom and excellence, it goes beyond the practical. So students loving truth and beauty, knowing the art of giving effectiveness to truth, right? Knowing the art, that's the rhetoric, and inspiring others to embrace truth, goodness, and beauty. And that's why it's important in this program, and I think across all our, when we're planning a program for students, K-12 or 4-12, is to think, do we give them that opportunity to make a speech, to give that presentation, so that they are trained to inspire others and to engage articulately, right? So one final note, and then I want to open it up to questions. So we have these exercises. The Progym, again, as I said, is preparing students for more formal rhetoric study in the upper school or even in college. But this piece here on virtue is that we want them to grow up and to be men and women of virtue and wisdom. And again, in the introduction, Paul Kortepeter says, right, that the Progym is not meant to lead only to eloquence, right, only to skill of delivery, or empty forms of speaking and composition. It's not meant for manipulative sound bites or commercials, right, made to benefit unscrupulous political or economic class. But the Progym is training meant for everyone who wants to engage with the urgent ideas of the day. So we all know that rhetoric can be misused. We see that as adults in advertising, politicians. We see that happening, but that's not what this is about, right? Quintilian from first century used the Progym, right? He trained his students. He said, no one can be a true orator unless he is a good person. And this is actually brought into the first lesson of, I believe it's book 10, when you're working with your older students. Before you even get into rhetoric, to style, to the modes of persuasion, right? You talk about this idea of good. What is the good, right? We want to make sure that the emphasis is on virtue. And so we analyze the actions and behaviors of men and women through history, or the behaviors of characters through great literature. Because rhetoric can be abused, it can be misused, but this was not what the Romans or the ancients were using it for, and certainly not Quintilian. And so here we are today as Christians taking that and reviving that, so that we can train our students to be intelligent, and virtuous. So with that, I love to go to questions.
On behalf of everyone, Joanne, thank you for taking the time to explore the progym and writing and rhetoric for us today. If you haven't submitted a question yet and you've got one, now would be the time to drop it in the Q&A box. Icon is at the bottom of the screen. After we go through questions, I'll take some time to screen share on my end and point out some helpful links, resources, and also just some details on a 20% off sale, end of the summer sale, flash sale we're having on writing and rhetoric and well-ordered language, our grammar curriculum too. So first and foremost, Joanne, I saw that there were two questions about a book and author that you quoted at one point, and I missed that. So could you, and I know you had a couple quotations in there, but do you remember what book and author that was?
Yeah, I think it was The Mysteries of Life in Children's Literature. I'll put it in the text here, or the chat, I should say.
Perfect.
I know I didn't tell you I was going to bring in extra books, but that's the teacher, right? We have books at our desk and we're like, oh, this is a good one. This is a good quote.
You see it and you quote it. Yep.
But I have read this book and I come back to it and there's a lot in there that's just really beautiful. So I put it in the chat. It says books that inspire a love of life, because that's always a hard one too. How do you shape the affections of your students? So I'm always looking for books that support.
One question that we always get during writing webinars, and I see it on here, so I'll address it first because it is an important question, and that is in regards to students joining later. Crystal asks, would like to hear recommendations for students joining later. She's doing one book half this year and one doing 7 and 8. So could you comment on that, Joanne, and then also just different entry points along the series? What are some spots where students could do? All students have to start at book 1, book 4, book 7? Could you name some of the different entry points in writing and rhetoric? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great question. So with homeschoolers, and if it's a one-on-one kind of situation, even with your older students, you can start with book 1. Now I say that, and probably some people are thinking, what? How does that work? Well, the fables are for everyone, adults included. So there are ways that if you're working on a one-on-one situation, that you can start from the beginning if they're brand new. It also depends on the time you have. And I also say when you're working on a one-on-one situation, especially with our older students, when you see that they've mastered a concept or a skill, and you have that luxury to create a timeline that works for you, then just move on. So it's not necessarily important that you're finishing every book, right? But it's about mastery. Just like it's not important to rush through the book every, in a semester or the year because, well, we've done the book. It's about, are we mastering the material? And you'll notice, and I didn't mention this in the presentation, but there's repetition built into the book. Every lesson you see that you are writing the same essay, but the content changes. And so it's for this reason that, for instance, with our older students, if you want to start from the beginning and begin with book 1 and just get into, okay, let's have a couple units on the narrative. Let's have a couple units on fable. Now let's do the expository essay. And you're just trying to make sure that their skills are in fact sharp, because a lot of times with our older students, he or she might say, oh yeah, I've written the 5-paragraph essay. Oh yeah, I know what expository means or what persuasive skills are. And then you might encounter some learning gaps. So it's always good one-on-one to have that ability. Now, that's kind of the ideal situation, and most of us don't have that. We have students who are trying to get prepared and move on to middle school or high school or, of course, college. So if you have a middle school student who is a good writer, and when I say a good writer, I am thinking about they understand the basic pieces of grammar, those grammatical concepts. They have a solid understanding. So you're not seeing incomplete sentences. They understand how to write a paragraph. They understand the idea of writing cohesively. So their writing is not disjointed. I would say starting them with book 5, which is the beginning of year 3, or book 7, which is the beginning of year 4. Now, when you're looking at, okay, am I either starting my middle schooler in year 3 or year 4, I ask this question. So book 5 covers the argumentative paragraph. Are they able to present an opinion, give evidence, and good reasoning, explanation? They also bring in quotes, textual evidence. If they have that skill, then they're ready for year 4, which starts with that book 7. If they are solid in the expository essay, but they haven't worked with argumentative writing or argumentative paragraphs, argumentative essay, then start them in book 5, because they will get a lot of practice there, presenting an opinion, giving evidence, reasoning, and then of course learning how to embed quotes or pull textual evidence, which also then brings in a little bit of kind of a, not a full research, but yeah, it's not the full research unit that comes in book 7 and 8, so year 4, but they do start to get a foundational introduction there to MLA, because they're working with quotes and citations. So that's a good way to think about that. Now, if you're talking about 8th, 9th grade, or maybe even a 10th grader, this is again where you look at the student and you say, okay, if they have a solid command of grammar, they write multi-paragraph essays, they just have never heard of progym, they don't understand the idea, and they need to work on their persuasive skills, I would start them with book 9. So they can do book 9 and 10. And I know this year we've released book 11, so then they would continue their thesis study with book 11. So with a solid writer who's in the 8th grade, 9th grade, and I do have some 10th graders, I would start with that book 9. If they are more kind of like those middle school skills that I talked about, where they're not sure of the argumentative paper, they haven't done a research paper, that's where you can start looking back at year 4 and maybe even year 3, depending upon the skill. So I hope that kind of gives you some places to start with. In some situations where you're just really pressed and you're like, what can I skip? I'll tell you what not to skip. Don't skip, of course, making sure they understand narrative, the description, but don't skip book 4, the CREA. Make sure that they understand CREA. Don't skip book 5. And then of course, book 7 is important. And book 9 is, we're talking about these older students starting in the progym because they're new. Book 9 does a review of all of those skills that came before. So they're writing 4 paragraph essays as they're studying book 9. So it's short writing assignments, but they're reviewing a lot of those foundational pieces that were studied from essentially book 1 through 8.
Thank you, Joanne. Shifting gears slightly from older students to younger students, Megan asked a good question about School A Academy's approach and why Classical Academic Press encourages starting the series with 3rd graders, but School A Academy's recommended grade levels for writing and rhetoric year 1 is grades 4 to 5. Could you clarify that, and then also maybe add on to that by saying, what if I have an exceptionally gifted 2nd grader or even 1st grader? Is that too young to start in level 1, level 2? Is 3rd grade kind of like a definite starting point for students? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. So homeschoolers out there, we kind of have this target grade range, right? We have to think about our students in terms of their skill level, not necessarily their age or their grade. So it's not a clear line. Now, if you're working in a school, I know it doesn't always work that way. You have, your 3rd grade curriculum, 4th grade curriculum, and so on. So I'll talk about that. I think in that kind of goes back to more what I was saying when you're trying to kind of bring our students into the program. But when you're a homeschool or a co-op even, and you have more flexibility, or if you're leveling some of these classes. I know some of our brick and mortar middle schools can have 7th graders in a 6th grade class or vice versa. So you do have some flexibility in those situations. So in terms of how we do it at School A Academy, that first year, I would say what we're finding is that it really comes down to the student, right? You could have an exceptional 2nd grader who might start. I think that's rare. More of what I'm seeing is that 3rd grader where they might also have the skills, the maturity level. They are either a high functioning reader, or they've been read to, so their mind is just full with great stories, and they're just academically more mature maybe than some of their typical peers. And so that's why you have younger students finding success starting at the 3rd grade. What I do see more of is a range, and it's usually 3 levels. And it'll fall one way or the other. So for example, you might have a class that's targeted for 4th graders. And actually, I just had an email with a mom. Let me see if I wrote down some notes because it's right on this question. Just so how do they understand placement and also what those ranges are? So what that means is you might have a student who is starting year 2, right? So that's books 3 and 4. And they could be a 5th grader who's also in a class with 4th graders and 6th graders because their skills are different. I would say the typical path that you see is year 1, so books 1 and 2. You'll see grades 3 and 4. You could have some 5th graders. Year 2, you'll see 4th and 5th grade, but you could also see some 6th graders. Year 3 is that 5th and 6th grade, but you could have some 7th graders. And each year you're studying 2 books. Now you can change the pacing, which then means you kind of change, are you trying to do 2 books in a year, which is what we recommend, and it is possible to do that. Or some families and even schools have taken a year to do 1 book, and that's fine. I mean, you've got to tailor what you're doing in your home or in your school to meet the needs of the students you have. But that's why we have that range, is because we do obviously take into consideration the age and the development in terms of their ability and skills, but it isn't just cookie cutter and to say, okay, this is grade 3 and this is grade 4. So when we're talking about our younger students, we really just need to think about, and of course, School A Academy also, it's online. So we also have that component of readiness for online learning, right? Computer use, being able to sit in front of a computer. If you're teaching around a table at home or in the classroom, the learning environment is different than in an online setting. So some of our younger students aren't quite ready for that. But when you're working around a table, that's why you could start with students 3rd grade. I don't have a lot of conversations with parents starting it in the 2nd grade. Again, it just depends on your child and their abilities. If you want to start, sometimes what I've seen on just kind of few occasions is they've started with a 2nd grader and they find that they're going back and reviewing, or they go through those first 2 books at a slower pace. But you want to use in the very beginning. In fact, let me see if I have it queued up, but in the very beginning of our books, it's in any one of them. Let me share this, see if I can get to it really quickly. It provides an overview of each level. Let me see where it's at. And this list is a great thing for teachers to have as well, because they can make placement assessments or even kind of descriptions for their other teachers who are, maybe teaching a level below or a level above, and they're trying to make sure, okay, what do I need to know to prepare them for the next level? What do I need to know about my incoming students? So you'll see at the beginning of each text, and this is probably the best view of it. This is all within the introductory pages. So hopefully you all can see this. You have a list here. It's a bird's eye view of everything. And of course, we now go up to book 11, which is thesis part 2, focuses on the canons of rhetoric and oration. But you can see when you're looking at this, the skills and the content of what's covered. Now, obviously, it doesn't go down into the nuts and bolts. When you go on the product page, you can look at samples, but this at least gives you an idea of, okay, if I want to put my student into year 4, which is books 7 and 8 here, so we're talking about encomium, vituperation, and comparison. These are the things that they should be ready for, right? Or if I want them to start in impersonation and description, which is actually the start of year 5, then they should have covered this material in whatever writing program they've been in. They should be familiar, they should have mastery of these skills. So that's a good way to also, and again, down to your earliest learners, if they're 2nd grade, are they ready for narrative? Are they ready for the copy work, right? When they're learning descriptive elements. Handwriting with our little ones, it's going to be about reading and handwriting. If those skills are above average, then of course you can, look at this program and see, is it a good place for them to start, a good time for them to start.
Thanks, Joanne.
Sure.
Another question we get frequently is the cohesiveness, the link between writing and rhetoric and well-ordered language. And Lori asks, do we recommend taking our grammar class along with the writing class? There is a marriage between the 2 books, though it's not an extremely firm one. Could you comment a little bit on why it is beneficial, a few of the pros, when it comes to using writing and rhetoric in conjunction with well-ordered language? For those of you that don't know, well-ordered language is Classical Academics Press grammar. It's our grammar curriculum for students in grades 3 through 6. Yeah,
so the reason why well-ordered language works well with writing and rhetoric is it's not a heavy writing curriculum. And that's going to be the most important point when you're trying to figure out, how do I bring in grammar study along with writing? You do so much reading and writing with well-ordered language, or I'm sorry, with writing and rhetoric, that you don't want to have a grammar program that's also heavy on writing. And so whether it's well-ordered language or another program that you know well and like, or someone's recommended, you just want to make sure that it's not heavy in writing. So that's going to be, I would think, kind of the most important point when it comes to the grammar study, and to alternate days even, so that, maybe you've got your writing day and a grammar day. But it is important that you're running the program together, simultaneously, or with your older students. Again, if you have identified some learning gaps in their grammar knowledge, that you're also finding ways to bring in that grammar. Well-ordered language has what I call kind of these mini reviews. So they bring in grammar through sentence play and copiousness exercises, but it's not enough. It's more, in fact, what I find when I'm in class with my students, let's say we'll have some kind of sentence play that brings in, the 8 parts of speech. I will always ask, okay, is there anything here that you guys really struggled with? Or, was it new? And I just identify kind of what those areas are. And then because I partner with parents, I have emailed parents and I've said, okay, here's the exercise we've done. I recognize that there may maybe be some, there are pieces here that need to be reviewed. And that's the same thing for a parent who's teaching it at home, or the classroom teacher, is that writing time is for writing time, but you are going to identify those pieces of grammar. And then you want to make sure that if for the brick and mortar setting, if you are also the grammar teacher, you can, bring that into grammar time. But I don't ever want to mislead and have people see, because you will see it in there, that there are grammar concepts reviewed in the writing and rhetoric program, but it's not enough to say, okay, that's the grammar program. So well-ordered language is great. It's singing, it's chanting, it's repetition, it's vocal. It's very engaging, and especially with our younger ones. I know our older students get a little bit more shy and they don't like to chant together sometimes, but our little ones love it.
Thanks, Joanne. Moving on to some questions about writing exercises and concepts. We have a few good ones here. I'll start with this one. Could you point out any specific pro gym exercises in the text itself? What are some exercises when looking at samples or when opening up their physical books that teachers can look towards as excellent examples of what the pro gym looks like? And then another part of this question is, how do I see the program in action? That's a little bit trickier, but I'll respond to that by saying we do have a series of videos on our YouTube channel from the author, Paul Cordepeter, and from teachers, two teachers, one, I believe, teaching 5th grade and one 6th grade, writing and rhetoric. And they are talking about the program in action in their classrooms. And I'll share a link to that and access to that later, show you how to easily find it. But we definitely want to address that part because that is a great question, seeing the program in action, and definitely can do more work to get more video content up on that. But that is one spot, one way to find and review that. But as to the first part of that question, Joanne, if you could answer some specific pro gym exercises in the book.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm trying to walk and talk at the same time. I'm looking at the back of the book. There's a couple different answers I think that I can provide for this question that hopefully is what they're looking for. In the teacher's edition. So if you are a parent teaching this at home, or of course a teacher in the classroom, within the teacher's edition, there are completed essays that I have used even when for instruction. So I will walk through a master essay, right? And I'll go through each paragraph as a teaching sample. And I'll do it in such a way where I'm saying, okay, just tell me what you see. And I don't actually, I mean, I've even done this in the beginning of the year or the beginning of a lesson. I don't give a lot of guidance other than just tell me what you see. And sometimes kids are like, well, I see sentences. And I'm like, great, how many sentences in this paragraph? Or, they'll say, well, I see evidence, I see, quotes. And so it's just by that simple exercise that they're starting to identify what makes up a master essay, kind of in the way when you do a study of a painting, and the series has these types of exercises where you're trying to get them to think more deeply about a concept or a theme that they're going to write about. So maybe there's a painting that is communicating something, right? I mean, art communicates. So what is this painting saying? What do you see in the painting? And so much in that way, that's what I'm asking the students to do. And I think it's a great way to start to train their eye to get into an essay and understand what, as I said, makes a good essay. Now, there's a couple different ways. This one in particular, this is I think this is a part of the research unit, if I'm correct. Yes. Okay, so this is one way that the teacher will see it. The students don't see it this way, but this is a guide that the teacher has. So this is the pre-writing for a research paper. And you can see here that there is a sample paragraph. The students aren't going to see this, but I've used these paragraphs even by sharing this screen with my students, where I'll show them, okay, when we're working on this particular paragraph, this is the conclusion. Here's what a paragraph might look like for this particular essay. So you can use the pre-writing prompts and go through it this way. And again, you don't have to share this. So as a teacher, you could have a completed work. This is your model. This is your guide as you're going in. And that's why also too, this is a great series for any of our new teachers or moms and dads that are new to the pro gym and they're thinking, oh gosh, if you're like me, maybe you have anxiety left over from your own experiences as a student learning to write, and you're like, I don't know how I'm going to be able to do this. I don't even like pro gym. What? I've never heard of it, but my friend just said this is great, and so I got this, and now what do I do? So the teacher's guide really gives you step-by-step guidance and examples that you can share with the students for teaching purposes, or you can keep them for your own formation and preparation before you go in and sit down around the table or, you know, in the classroom. Another way, and this is in one of our other books, you're given, let me think where this is at. You're given a completed essay. It's when they're writing their thesis. So this is with our older students. Let me see here. And so you're given an essay right at the beginning. See if I can find it really quick in this text. And you read it together. You go through all the parts, and then they go and now they introduce, oh, this is a great example. Okay, so this is in when they're writing a thesis. So this particular chapter goes through everything, paragraph by paragraph. So this is a reading assignment that I give my students, and I say, we're going to talk about this essay. We're going to learn what's going on in each paragraph, and then you're going to write it. Now, this is over a series of several weeks, but just to get them started, I asked them to go home and read through this chapter and annotate. So they're taking notes on this particular lesson that introduces a completed thesis essay. It's actually one that's written by Anthonius. And of course, he's our leader, right? This is where he's one of the gentlemen that we get the progym from. So we go through his progym that he wrote actually on the benefits of marriage, which is also fun to do with your older students because you get into this kind of conversation of the pros and cons about marriage, which is always, it's been an interesting topic of conversation. So they go through this, and you can see here we have his introduction, and then there is guidance and description around what's going on, what is he doing, questions for us to think about, what is the thesis statement. And so you go through this whole piece, brings in narratives, hooks, and these are things that are in the essay. So we're seeing the model, and then we're understanding what it is. The text defines it, so the students are getting definitions, examples, and then we're discussing it. And so it's piece by piece through here, and you can see there's a lot of review from things that our younger students have learned, or again, the older student who might not have been in any of those levels earlier, they're seeing it again, how to use questions, so specific techniques. Then we get another paragraph here, and he's using descriptions and illustrations, and they're going to have to learn to do that. And this is another example of an illustration, how to use proverbs and sayings. So you're given models and examples, and then as we get to the bottom here, and we move on into the next, as you can see, there's a lot here. That's why it takes several weeks. Samples. Again, these are those samples. I'm showing you the teacher edition. So it's very guided. You yourself are not having to try to come up with, oh gosh, is this the right way? So again, new parents, new teachers, it's really helpful. And then our veteran teachers or parents that have gone through this with their older students and now doing it again with their younger students, you always can adapt and you know, bring in other examples that you have found just by teaching it. When you get to the chapter, just so you're not watching me scroll through everything, you'll see, here it is, that you see the final one, and it's a complete essay. Let me share the screen here. And it's annotated, right? So it's labeled. And this is what, you know, the students are now seeing. This is Anthonius's completed thesis with everything annotated. So they can see, oh, this is what makes a refutation paragraph that's strong. This is what a good conclusion looks like. And this is what you do at the very beginning, right? You basically show them where you want them to go, and then you're going to lead them there. You're going to walk with them step by step. So I hope, forgive me, Joe, I hope that responded to the question. If you have it in front of you, if there's more to that. But and this, of course, is when they're writing their full essays. With our younger students, you also have the same format with the teacher's edition in terms of giving models, examples of mastery. They do have them in the text in our, and I don't have it in front of me, but in the refutation and confirmation, when they're writing vituperations and encomiums, there are completed essays, samples at the end of each chapter. They're within the teacher notes. Again, the students don't see that. So you really are guided, and hopefully that speaks to what her question was.
Thanks, Joanne. Yeah, I believe that question really does deserve a very comprehensive answer. And like I mentioned, we'll show you how to easily access multi-chapter samples for each book, so that you can explore those exercises on your own for books 1 through 11. As Joanne mentioned a few minutes ago, we just released book 11. It's a 12-book series, semester-based. So the series is intended for a 6-year time span. And we had one follow-up question about completing well-ordered language and writing and rhetoric simultaneously. Often we do see that happening, although well-ordered language is intended to be completed in 4 years and writing and rhetoric in 6 years. Often school and homeschool educators, instead of treating the books in level 4 and of well-ordered language as semester-based, they'll take each book and do it over a year. So level 3A, instead of doing it in a semester, will be spread out over the course of a year. Levels, same with level 3B, 4A, and 4B. So it really is a case-by-case basis. They don't have to be completed at the same time, but there is an alternative there to kind of lining up the series so that they do end simultaneously or close to the same year for your student. So again, that happens by taking the well-ordered language level 3 and level 4 books and spacing them out instead of completing them in a semester. We do have time for a few more questions. We've had some great ones so far. And yes, Joanne, thank you for mentioning Rhetoric Alive there too. I'll speak more on that a little bit later. Good question from Julie that I wanted you to answer quickly. Julie says, there isn't space in the book for rewriting. Do you encourage rewriting, or do you just move through the book?
No, absolutely. Yes, rewriting. It's much like, well, you can do it in a couple ways. And this is the way that I've done it. There is repetition built into the series. So as I said before, for example, you'll spend all of first semester writing refutations and confirmations, right? This is just one example for year 3, the argumentative paragraph. So the content changes, but you're writing, essentially, you alternate. So you write a refutation, then you write a confirmation, and so on. If there's a particular essay that a student writes for you that you feel like, oh gosh, we can't move on because you're going to see that they're just going to keep making the same mistake, then new content doesn't change that, right? I mean, they have to correct the error in their understanding of the form or the content. Otherwise, they just keep doing it. And as teachers and moms and dads, we've seen that where, okay, we've read a different story now and we're going to write about it, but I still see the same problems happening. So that's again where the program is flexible. Pacing is flexible. As the instructor, you decide whether you need to spend another week with this student on this essay or another week with the class on this particular essay. So this again is also kind of goes into the theory and the practice, right? When we're talking about classical education, it isn't just about the practical, right? We're not trying to rush through the book to say, oh, I finished the book. If we need to slow down, and I tell my parents this, we might not finish the book, but because there is repetition, if I spend 2 weeks on the same essay because we need to kind of make some corrections and the students need more practice on a particular skill or concept, then it's okay because there are going to be other opportunities. So maybe they get 3 opportunities to write a refutation and not 5. that's okay. They're still going to master that skill because that's what I'm doing on kind of slowing it down and making sure. So I hope that makes sense, that maybe you don't cover as many stories or as many lessons, but you're still within the framework of the book, where the point is that they're mastering, in this case, it would be the refutation or confirmation, or the vituperation, or the crea. Kids have, I think, maybe 5 or 6 creas planned out for the year, but maybe you only write 4, and that's okay. So if you need to build in time and space for rewrites, for what I used to call them, and I still do with my students, the writing workshops. Sometimes that's one-on-one with a teacher. Sometimes it's, if you have a class setting, it's with a group. I'm asking them to look for a specific skill, or maybe we're working on a certain aspect of style. So absolutely, build in your rewrites, slow down your pacing, be flexible. And I know sometimes that's a little bit hard, maybe in your school settings. So just work with your department chair or your school leader, your academic dean, so that, hopefully you can have that space and time to perhaps not finish the text, but to finish well with mastery. And then I just wanted to jump in and add one thing, just because I know this is also hard with our older students. And I see this because someone had asked, what do you do with the kids that finish book 11 or book 10, depending upon, if you go on to the latest book that's come out for this year. When you get into the pre-rhetoric group, so we're talking about 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade year, there's a lot of choices for rhetoric study. And as I said, you kind of, especially at School A Academy, it's hard to decide where to go. So sometimes with our older students, they might be ready just to jump into the Rhetoric Alive curriculum and just start with that year 1. Year 1 goes into the canons of rhetoric, much like book 11. So if you see that things are overlapping, they are. And that just happens because these texts are kind of developed at different times, and the timing of publication and all those things happen. So again, know your student, know their skills, and then when you're looking at a handful, I mean, in our case, I'm thinking of 3 resources that tend to overlap, especially now with our book 11 out. Just think about what are they needing to study and master, and then their age as well, right? If they're an 8th grader, they have more time. So, staying with writing and rhetoric might be the best way to go. If they're already a 10th grader, you might want to bring them into the Rhetoric Alive series and perhaps not, finish with writing and rhetoric. We've had parents do that. So I just put that out there, that you will see overlap. And so you just kind of have to think about what's the best path forward for your student, their age, and where they are at that time and their skill level.
Thanks, Joanne. I'll ask you one more question here, and then move on to some screen sharing on my own. I'll share some resources to wrap up our time. A few questions we didn't get to today. If we didn't answer your question, or if you think of a question after the fact, or if you're listening to this recording 3 years from now and you think of a question, you can direct that question to our info box. It's info@classicalsubjects.com. I'm adding that to the chat box right now. You should see it pop up, info@classicalsubjects.com. You can ask that question. It'll be directed to a member of our resource team or our sales team, and we will answer your question then, whether it's tomorrow or next week, or like I said, several years from now, if you're listening to the recording for this webinar. Last question I wanted to ask you comes from Anne. I thought this was a great question, kind of looking for an extended resource to talk clearly and simply about what the progym is and how it benefits culture. Do you know of any kind of extracurricular reading or research, whether it be a website or a book, where some of our audience members could go to learn more about the progym?
If you let
Really
me step
presenting
away,
the Progym to others too.
if you let me step away from my desk, my bookshelf is like an arm length right over here. And if I can get my hand on it, this is one that Christine Perrin actually recommended. And I got it years ago as a teacher. So I'm gonna walk away just one
Please,
second.
please.
See if I can get my hands on it. Okay, I'm shocked I found it. I was starting to get nervous. I didn't want to leave too much dead air, but it's called, and now it's not necessarily, it's not, this is the book about the progym, but the way that it emphasizes reading and thinking aligns with the progym. It's Engaging Ideas, and it's by John Bean. It says a professor's guide to integrating writing, critical thinking, and active learning in the classroom. I'll put that in there again. It's just engaging. Oh yeah, you did it. Great. Thank you. So this is a book that I go to, and I believe it was Christine Perrin that recommended it. I can't remember because it was my first year of teaching writing and rhetoric, and I was just kind of researching, and it goes into so much in terms of the types of things that you want to do with your students to shape their abilities, again, to write well, think well, speak well. And so that's why it goes really nicely with the progym and the modern student. And that's the other piece when we're talking about the writing and rhetoric series. Paul Corder-Peter talks about that, right? Like we're taking this program of writing, the preliminary exercises from the ancients, but we're applying it to the modern student and the modern classroom. So that's why this book is a great complement to that, because obviously this book is emphasizing what's going on real time. I mean, it goes into rubrics, and there are rubrics in the writing and rhetoric series, but if you're like me, you'll also find that sometimes you start crafting your own rubric after you've maybe taught writing and rhetoric under your belt for a while. So this is into assessment. And that's a whole nother webinar on assessing well, but it's just a great resource. So I've had it, and I refer back to it. It even goes into kind of how to do the thesis writing, discussion, all of the things that the progym requires of the student. And it's enjoyable to read. And sometimes I know you get a teacher book and it's very dry, but I don't know. I am somewhat of a nerd. So if you get this book and you're like, I don't know why she said it was enjoyable to read it, but hopefully you're like me and you'll find it useful.
I think everyone who is still attending the webinar at this point, and thank you if you stuck around to this point. I think they might nerd out with you a little bit on that.
Oh, thanks, Jennifer. She says, I'm not a writing nerd, but I enjoyed that book. See, nerds and non-nerds. Very good.
I will. We are past our 4:15 time that I talked about, and this does tend to happen when we're talking about a really engaging subject, and we are today. I do quickly want to share on my end some resources, and if you've already seen or know these, feel free to duck out. Thank you for joining us today. First thing I want to show is how to locate the Writing and Rhetoric collection on our website, classicalacademicpress.com. You head to resources, click on product lines, and you'll find Writing and Rhetoric right towards the top here. This is our whole collection, books 1 through 11. More importantly, when you click on a product page, whether it be a program page or a single book page, see down here, you have this look inside feature. And this is a really nice feature. It's actually available on all of our product pages. By clicking on the product photo, you'll be able to see a sample from the student edition, the teacher's edition, and also the audio that comes with the book. So again, you can access that sample and download it by clicking on the product image. We call that our look inside feature. You scroll further down on the product page, doesn't matter which product page, and go to support. You'll see the suggested schedule for that level, scope and sequence for the whole writing and rhetoric series, the errata sheet, and then rubrics that you'll use when teaching the text. So whether you're considering teaching the text or you're committed to teaching the text, these are some great resources. We want to make sure you know how to find them. They're under the support tab on the product page. So that's the product itself. And then we're here under our education blog. There's a few articles that you can find our education blog. It's called Insights by clicking on this top banner. It'll always be here at the top right. If you go down to categories on the right side here and click on writing, and I'm going to drop this link into the chat box. You'll find 3 really helpful posts here. The first is called Mapping Your Writing Logic and Rhetoric Programs Towards the Senior Thesis, which, as Joanne talked about briefly, is the culmination to all of this. This is incredibly important. We're teaching, we're working in the present, but we also have our eyes on the future. And the future for our students, our classically taught students, is almost always this senior thesis. So this is a very simple, short read. It can be digested in only a couple minutes, but it kind of breaks down in grades 7 through 12. You'll see logic and rhetoric texts here, our writing texts here. Even though it's writing and rhetoric, we consider writing and rhetoric our writing program, and then Rhetoric Alive is our rhetoric only program. But this is a great breakdown of a suggested track for 7th through 12th graders, getting them to and through that senior thesis on into higher education. And like we mentioned, Writing and Rhetoric Book 11 is, as of a couple weeks ago, available. So this is definitely one blog post to bookmark and check out. Another one is this article with Writing and Rhetoric teacher Alicia Vanderhoof. She teaches at the Geneva School in Orlando, Florida. And this is just a transcribed interview with her. And she talks about teaching writing and rhetoric in the classroom. She also has some video clips that I'll show you shortly on our YouTube channel. And then finally, it's a bit of an older read, but this blog post really goes into the Progym, and it's written by Christine Perrin, wife of Dr. Christopher Perrin, who Joanne referenced earlier as the one who placed that resource in her hand. So Christine also has quite a bit of a background with the Progym, and she explores it in depth in this article here. So I will drop that resource in. And finally, our YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and search Classical Academic Press, you'll arrive at our channel. And if you go to playlists, under playlists, you'll find a writing and rhetoric playlist with 54 videos. Most of these videos are only a few minutes long. They're pretty short clips, but they, like I mentioned earlier, are from writing and rhetoric author Paul Kortepeter and 2 writing and rhetoric teachers, including Alicia Vanderhoof. And you can see the full playlist right here. And then also our Classical Academic Press webinars playlist contains webinars from a number of subjects, but you'll find Joanne's Writing and Rhetoric webinar from last year in there as well under the Classical Academic Press webinars playlist. And that is on our YouTube channel. And finally, last but not least, if you are considering purchasing the curriculum, now's a great time. We have a writing and grammar flash sale going on through August 16th. You don't need to bookmark this page. This is just a landing page that we use online. If you go to Writing and Rhetoric and purchase, our programs are already on sale, but if you purchase the individual texts, they'll be 20% off, as well as well-ordered language, our grammar curriculum that we discussed, 20% off as well. That flash sale started today. It ends midnight on Monday, August 16th. And that long-winded review is over. I hope some of those resources and links are helpful. We really do encourage you to use the look inside feature and review those samples of the writing and rhetoric text. And as I promised, I'm dropping in the link to those 3 blog posts that I referenced earlier. Joanne, anything to add or any words of wisdom to wrap us up here today?
What's pressing on my heart is not to be intimidated. So if you're new to the Progym, new to writing and rhetoric series, do not be intimidated. You'll see, just get any one of the books in your hand or look at the sample through one of the product pages. And the way that it's laid out, you're guided step by step. So enjoy, and you know where to find us if you have questions.
Exactly right. And I'll also remind you, info@classicalsubjects.com is the email address to pass on any questions you may have post-webinar too. Dropped in a link to the flash sale, but again, you can shop and save. The discount will be applied at checkout just by visiting the Writing and Rhetoric or Wilder Language Collection page. You can also access the sale pretty easily through that link I dropped in. Again, I'm Joe Softly. Huge thank you to Joanne Schinstock for joining me. We'll have to make this a yearly occurrence, Joanne, because I love doing webinars with you. But thank you for your time today. Thank you to everyone who joined us. We're blessed by your presence and by you coming alongside of us in this classical renewal. We're thrilled to help you as you get underway in the 2021-22 school year and beyond. So on behalf of Joanne and Classical Academic Press, I bid you a good afternoon and a great weekend. So long, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.